Go ahead, Ethan. All right. Great. Well, let's call the meeting to order, and thanks for showing up to come and talk about the climate action plan tonight. This is our opportunity for public input on the climate action plan, although there are also a number of events where members of either the climate action plan task force or the energy committee are attending to gather input for people who are not able to make it here. Paul, would you like to give the emergency instructions?
Absolutely. For those who are here in person, the emergency instructions are to head out the doors at the back of the room and head left or head right. If you're at home, look for the nearest exit at your house.
Thank you. So, beginning of our agenda tonight is just to do a quick welcome and introductions. So, having welcomed you all, let's start. Maybe we'll start introductions up here and go around the room and then hit people on the Zoom. Paul, you want to start down there?
My name is Paul Connor. I'm the Planning and Zoning Director and Chief Sustainability Officer for the city, and I'm a non-voting representative to the committee from the staff.
Hi, my name is Sriram Srinivasan. Everyone calls me Srini, S-R-I-N-I. I represent the Economic Development Committee in the Climate Change Task Force.
Great. And yeah, I should remember to turn my mic on so you can hear a little better. Ethan Goldman, chairing the Climate Action Task Force and representing the Energy Committee.
Michael Mittag, member of this task force and serve on the Planning Commission for South Burlington. Been around for 20 odd years.
Hi, I'm Melanie Needle, Senior Planner at the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, and one of the consultants who worked on the Climate Action Plan.
Sure, go ahead.
Penny Tompkins, citizen.
Citizen and city council.
Just in time for introduction, sir.
It's hard to hear people in the audience. If
Okay.
they're not using the mic, I can't hear who's speaking.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know where the mics are. Maybe better in there.
My name's Mark Bradley, local. I was just down at local city hall. Quick guess, it might be up here. Just have a quick matter to bring up to the board.
Great. So for those at home, we will invite folks when they do have comment to come to the mic, but just for introductions, we have 3 members here in person, Councillor Tim Barrett, Penny Tompkins, and Mark Bradley.
Thanks.
And then can we do an introduction on the screen? A little hard to go around. Darylyn, maybe?
Sure. I'm Darylyn Peters, and I'm a member of the task force representing the Affordable Housing Committee.
Okay. Anne?
I'm Ann Janda, Energy Project Manager at Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. I've been assisting Melanie with the work on the plan.
Roseanne?
Roseanne, resident of South Burlington.
Keith?
Hi, I'm Keith Epstein, a member of the public and also a member of the Energy Committee.
And Tim?
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Tim Perrin. I'm a member of the Energy Committee.
Right. So I guess we'll launch into the community forum and go over the short presentation we've got tonight. Paul, I assume you're going to lead the slides from your computer. Thanks. And I'll take my mask off to maybe be a little more understandable, I hope. So this is going to be a quick presentation to sort of give an overview of the Climate Action Plan and its current draft. The full text of the Climate Action Plan in this draft is available on the city's website. There's a Climate Action Task Force section of the website, which I believe is where that's posted. And I guess let us know if you have any trouble finding that, but hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Next slide, please. So just briefly, some background on why a climate action plan. So I've been in this space for 20 years, and for a long time, it was a very abstract quantitative exercise to talk about someday in the future, maybe things will happen and the climate will change. Now we're already seeing some of the effects, although they're continuing to get more dramatic. So there's some stats that we've provided here, just showing how Vermont's climate in particular is changing, because as much as we look at the global numbers, it's different in every location. So we're seeing things getting hotter in the summer and the winter, which is affecting the length of the winter. And as we know, there's a large economic impact to our winters changing. And it also has a lot of impact on precipitation, since warmer air can hold more moisture, and that can often be very damaging. Next slide, please. So as we continue to forecast out into the future, we often talk about this 1.5 degrees Celsius target, which is the, I hesitate to call it a safe level, but it's the threshold where the researchers think things get a lot less safe. So this is sort of an estimate for the timeline that we have to start making dramatic changes. So this is forecasting if from today we start cutting emissions, and by 2040, pretty much cease to emit CO2 and other greenhouse gases, that the average temperatures will go somewhere in that green path. So it's frankly not a lot of time, and the risk for overshoot is pretty significant. Next slide. So here's some specific forecasts from the IPCC report, the International Panel on Climate Change, commissioned by the UN. And specifically, they call out some of the potential impacts on natural and human systems, and that there are going to be irreversible effects, right? Some things don't come back the way. You can't unbreak the vase when you knock it off the shelf, no matter how sorry you are. So particularly, it's increasing climate hazards, and those are risks to ecosystems and humans. I'll say as a side editorial, I think sometimes we get caught up in the save the planet and will the planet be harmed. Personally, I think there's a save the humans argument that hopefully resonates with all the humans on the meeting tonight. And so the risks that we're talking about, it has a lot of different factors about individual vulnerability and exposure, and it will affect different countries in different ways and different ecosystems in different ways. These are all risks at high confidence. So you can read these in more detail, but even at 1.5 degrees C, we're not without risk, but this is our best chance to limit the risk to a manageable level, if we can put it in that brutal terms. Next slide, please. So here's the, here's the history of this task force. Last August, the City Council passed a resolution and convened this task force and asked the task force to produce a climate action plan. The cities had resolutions on the books for years to take action or meet climate goals, but there was never a concrete action or set of actions. And so that's the change now, is that we're going to create an action plan. So we've held 13 meetings, and we've dug into a lot of super wonky details that everyone up here would be happy to talk to you about for probably longer than you're interested in listening. And we came up with some high impact actions out of the long list of actions that we think are recommended. And these are specifically established to meet the emissions reductions targets, which we'll get into as well. So we have two components that have been developed by the CCRPC, Melanie and Ann, and that's an inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions, starting from somewhat in the past, and then two forecasted scenarios, a business as usual, if we don't do anything, and then the science-based targets that we can hit to be consistent with our goals for warming. Next. So one factor that
is important to consider that sits on top of all of the specific actions that are recommended in the plan is equity. There are unequal impacts of not only climate change, but of the actions that we take to prevent climate change. And so we have been working with the State of Vermont Climate Council, which is an organization sort of created under a parallel mechanism at the state level, creating a climate action plan for the state. And they published guiding principles for a just transition to address equity in climate action. And it basically involves asking these three questions: who is helped, who is harmed, and who is missing? And so I'll say, in part, the outreach that we're doing right now is trying to address the who is missing part of the conversation. It has necessarily been a small group of us who've been working on this. And so we're looking to hear from more voices right now. And I won't read all the details of this, but the idea is that everyone needs to come along, right? It's the goal of stopping climate change is not for one human to make it unscathed. It's for all of us to get through and to create a better life for all humans. Next slide. So here's some specific issues that have come up and some recommendations out of some of the top tier sectors that are included in the climate action plan. So buildings and thermal is one area of significant emissions today and significant opportunities, but people have different housing situations depending on their income, depending on disability status and age. And so the cost of some of these actions is extremely expensive and typically falls on the individual. Transportation is actually the largest sector, although a lot of the factors that we're going to take to address it are at a national level rather than a city level. But once again, individual budgets are going to have to purchase some of these EVs, and the availability of chargers, things like that, fall differently on different portions of the population. Renewable energy, again, variations based on housing stock and access to capital. And natural areas has aspects both in terms of the CO2 absorption, but also in terms of the mitigation of rainwater and heat and its impacts on health. And so those resources, again, are not spread evenly around all parts of our community. Next slide. So here are the two scenarios that I mentioned earlier, right? A business as usual scenario, and that is what we're forecasting based on population growth and a number of other factors that, obviously we can't forecast everything up to 2050, but based on what we know today, the emissions would basically stay pretty similar to where they are now and eventually rise a little bit going out to 2050. And then the blue line represents the reductions that that we would need to hit in order to meet some of the goals in the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is the Vermont state climate action legislation. And I would actually recommend, 2050 is a long way away and it's a long way down to hit that 90% reduction. And I would actually recommend that it's most productive probably to think about how do we hit the near-term targets of 2025. And that'll help us get some of the mechanisms in place to hit some of the larger, longer term targets, and we can build on those. So you can really see how dramatic that slope is compared to what our history before in the last 20 years has been. And if you were to look back more decades in the US, you would see that there's been even more growth. The flattening that we're seeing is only a recent effect due to the efficiency programs we have and some of the other national policies. Is this a clarifying question?
Yeah, so this is just South Burlington?
These are the emissions just for South Burlington. Yep, that's right. Next slide, Paul. Oh, yeah.
Yes, just one note, because the folks in the audience aren't on mic, if somebody does pose a question, can you repeat the question?
Yes,
so that
thank
folks
you.
at home can hear? So
Okay.
the question was this just for South Burlington? And the answer was yes.
Yes, thank you, Paul. So breaking down the emissions by sector, we can see the orange section of that pie chart is the largest sector transportation. And then the two blue sectors, residential buildings and commercial buildings. The transportation is about 2/3, buildings are about the remaining third, pretty evenly split between commercial and residential buildings. Other is pretty small. One thing we'll note is that Vermont has largely decarbonized its electricity sector. And so in a lot of other states, they also have a lot of work to do to reduce emissions in electricity, which we basically don't have to deal with here. And then you can see, again, by sector, those two major areas shown today and in 2030. And there's some discrepancy. There's a few different slices of what the trajectories are. So there's Global Warming Solutions Act has a particular set of dates and percentages. The science-based targets that we're working with here, slightly different dates and targets. They're pretty similar in terms of their trajectory, but you will see in some places the specific dates and percentages vary. Yeah, Tim.
Transportation calculation done based upon
That's
the number of cars traveling, the number of cars in our borders emitting CO2, or is it based upon gallons of gas purchased at gas stations, or the registration of vehicles that are in Southampton City?
Good question, Tim. So there's basically three different ways of so the question was, how are the emissions from the transportation sector measured when we show the inventory today and our targets? And Tim mentioned that the three major ways, which are either based on cars that are vehicles registered in town, gas sold in town, or miles traveled in town. And it's the third in this case. We're following that strategy in order to consistently track. And obviously there's some debates about where is our sphere of influence, and there's pros and cons of all of them. But the short answer is miles driven in town, whether the trip initiates or ends in town, or neither.
So it includes all pass-through traffic.
It does include all pass-through traffic.
And the difficulty with that is it's for the CCRPC, it's very difficult to model just the emissions from residents in South Burlington. And I submit that it would be significantly lower if we were able to do that.
Is that done by traffic counts by a Bluetooth sensor on the side of the road? The way that they count cars now?
So the question is how vehicle miles traveled is tracked. Is it by Bluetooth? The way we estimate vehicle miles traveled for South Burlington is based on Chittenden County as a whole, as a region, their vehicle miles traveled, that we receive publications from the Agency of Transportation, and then a portion out South Burlington's portion from that total.
Is the apportionment based on population?
So the apportionment starts from our travel demand model. So we have a modeled number for 2015. And then to arrive at the number for 2019, did a projection in growth based on the change in VMT we saw between 2015 and 2019 at the county level, and then just followed that through to South Burlington. So it's initially based on modeled vehicle miles traveled from our transportation model, and then grew that as the years progressed to 2019 to get a 2019 data set.
And I will attest that having seen the model a few times, it is a very complex and in-depth model. It's not sort of a single number is thrown out for the county. There are dozens and dozens of little zones that are measured within it so that there can be really useful traffic analysis across the board. And the state uses their traffic counts to help sort of update the data on that pretty regularly. So it's no data is perfect, no methodology is perfect, but this is pretty strong, and it's something that I think at the beginning of this project we had some discussion, and the strength of using this approach is that it's repeatable as other communities follow our lead and do climate action plans, so that we're talking apples to apples, not just in South Burlington, but in each community, so that we're not undercounting or overcounting as we think about ourselves and then each of the 18 other communities in our county.
And I'm always happy to geek out on these models in my professional life. I'm a measurement and verification analyst for energy efficiency. So this is stuff that I do all day long. And all of the models are going to have some shortcomings, but I will say that to meet the kind of goals that we're setting forward today, we're going to have to make a dramatic change that will show up in any of the model, right? If the changes are so small that we're worried about them getting lost in the measurement system, we've missed the boat anyway. And for transportation in particular, we actually need to work on a regional level in order to solve these. There's no scenario in which South Burlington solves transportation and everywhere around us is still back in the last century model, right? That's not actually success by any measure. So again, plenty more room for discussion, but let's move on to the next slide. Hope that answered. So I'm not going to get into all the details on on some of the slides that we have here for each section, because I would invite folks to go and read the plan and get into the numbers. There's actually another level of detail beyond this where there's even more different actions. But I want to showcase maybe how we've organized these sort of overview information slides. First, there's the chart showing how we're expecting the emissions to reduce in that sector. Again, for all of them, it's pretty dramatically. And then we have some sort of top level targets and top level actions. And so what we're looking at is weatherizing and electrifying, right? And what you'll see in both these sectors is that because our electricity is carbon free and burning fossil fuel and transportation fuel is where our emissions are coming from, it's necessary to both reduce the energy, total energy use through efficiency and vehicle miles traveled, but dramatically, most of the reduction is coming through electrifying both of these sectors. So you'll see in here that it's really focused on shifting our heating to efficient electric heating, in addition to continuing to weatherize homes. So that's a lot of heat pumps, if you haven't heard that term before. So there's some other specific actions in here about strategies for motivating commercial buildings and to work with our partners in the region to increase weatherization, and in particular to create some ordinances that change the regulations around burning fossil fuel in buildings, and also to create some kind of a inspection regimen. Next slide, please. Yeah. Is there cooling specifically called out in here, heating and cooling?
This is thermal heating and cooling of buildings account for 34%, but you really mean just heating?
I think it's probably heating. It sort of depends on what your baseline number is, right? So some of the goals were set from a 2005 or a 1990 baseline. And so in the baseline, there was cooling, but you're right. If we look at a snapshot as of today and take GMP's numbers at face value, there's very little cooling, with the one exception I would say that escaped refrigerants from these compressor-based cooling systems does have an impact on greenhouse gases.
What was the question? It was hard to hear.
I'm sorry. Yes, the question is, the headline in the upper left mentions thermal heating and cooling accounts for emissions. And the question was, what about cooling is causing emissions?
Can I add that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Melanie, but as of the baseline year, the Green Mountain Power mix was not entirely carbon free. And so one positive thing that we can say that has happened since 2015 is that them going carbon free has moved cooling from the emitting to not emitting category for us. So as we start to make progress, that is an element that progress has been made on. So it is important to recognize that that has been an action taken already. And that's some of why the number has not been increasing the last few years.
Yep.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, one of your goals for 2030 is to reduce gas cars by 75%.
Mhm.
With electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, that's 8 years, 3 out of 4 cars. That seems awfully ambitious. I'm just curious. How's that going to happen? And I thought I heard recently the average price on an EV is 60. I don't know that. I thought I heard that they're expensive. And I know there's subsidies, et cetera. But I'm just curious about where that number and what it sounds like a stretch to me.
So the question was, the goal of replacing 75% of gas vehicles with EVs seems ambitious. Good goal, but it seems ambitious. How are we going to get there? I think, and Melanie, correct me, I think that's actually a 2050 goal, not a 2025 goal. Is that true?
Says 2030 on the board.
Yeah, it is a, it's
2030,
a
thank you.
2030 goal. It is ambitious. I agree with you. It does track very closely with what the state of Vermont is doing in their comprehensive energy plan. So it's a statewide policy trajectory in the CEP.
Can you make
So
sure-
it is,
can-
but it is based on
Can you spell out
2030.
CEP?
Comprehensive Energy Plan. State of Vermont Comprehensive Energy Plan has similar targets for the entire state.
Excuse me, this is Roseanne Online. Are you taking questions as you go along? It's,
We've mostly been looking for clarifying questions because there is going to be an opportunity to discuss. So if we want to get into a detailed discussion about this, I think it might be more appropriate to wait till we get through everything and see where things are. But if people do have questions about what does that mean, happy to answer those now if we're okay with that.
All right, because I'd like to talk about goals, but I'll wait till later because it's, okay.
Great. I will throw in one aside, which is that there are a lot of car manufacturers, they're saying they're going to stop producing internal combustion engines by 2025 or 2030. So this is why we pointed out that vehicles is one area that to some degree is controlled by forces outside of South Burlington. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think that it'll largely be market driven because the trends are clear that EV electric vehicles are on the rise. They're only a small percentage right now, but the trend is going in the right direction for us to meet that target.
Doubling every year.
This might be a good opportunity to just mention quickly about what's the source of the targets. And so,
yeah,
first of all, a 2030 target, we talk about 2050 in the Paris Accord. Why 2030? The group that has helped municipalities from across the country has, in their research, found that if we can set goals for 2030, they are much more tangible for municipalities and individuals and renters and homeowners to think about what do we do in the next 8 years versus if the goal is, oh, let's do it by 2050, it's so, it seems so far away that it doesn't really help us get actions right away. So that's one. And then the second one, at the beginning, Ethan had spoken about how the Regional Planning Commission has helped us to do some modeling on how to meet the overall targets. The models could have a lesser number on vehicles being converted to gasoline, from gasoline to electric. That means other targets need to go up. And so what the task force spent some time on with Melanie is every single one of the targets is ambitious. What is the most evenly spread version of a within the realm of achievable? So we could say, no vehicles are going to be converted, but that means all of the buildings need to be converted in the next very short period of time. Or inverse, if we got 100% of the vehicles converted, then in theory, some other aspect could be achieved slightly less. But this is trying to find a reasonable, if ambitious in every category version of it.
Yeah, I mean, the frustrating thing, I think, when you look back over time and you look at the angles on the graph is that we've been talking about some of these things for 20 or 30 years. And when it was a long way away, people pushed it off in the future and like, oh, if we just do a little each year. And the further we go and the closer the targets get to where we start to cross these tipping points in the atmosphere, the goals get really difficult. And there's no way of sugarcoating that.
This is Roseanne. I would like to make a comment, and I guess it is maybe a clarifying issue at this point when you're talking about goals. Is this okay to make?
Sure.
Okay. So when you're talking about goals and your targets here, so my clarifying question is that based on what we absolutely realistically need to do, not what we can do? if you set your goals on what is achievable, that will be great because we'll all be happy that we've achieved it. But if that's not what's needed in the code red climate crisis we're in, then we're just sugarcoating it. So are these goals what science says we have to do if we want to survive, or are they just what we think we can do?
So short answer is yes, these are the goals to meet the targets that science say we need to achieve. And we did not hold ourselves back to what is achievable politically or under the current set of laws that we have, or based on what we've seen people do in the last 5 years, because absolutely, we recognize that if we just say, well, we're going to do what we can do and we're doing what we can do, and so we're going to keep doing what we keep doing, well, that's the business as usual path. And we know that it doesn't get us anywhere close, not even with small nudges. On the other hand, there was a certain amount of realism, right? You don't see that there's a goal on here that everyone will stop driving cars entirely, right? We tried to balance out and say, well, all of the cuts are going to be hard. Let's try to find the balance of spreading it around, because the further you go down any one path, the harder and harder it gets. Weatherizing the last home in town will be the most difficult home in town. I can't tell you why, but we know it will be. That's why it's the last home in town. So we tried to make the balance, but yes, these are consistent with the 1.5 degrees C target.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to add that for every day or week or month or year that we delay the start of this program, the lift becomes heavier. It's already a very, very daunting program. These targets are extremely difficult to reach, but we think they're realistic and they can be reached, but we have to start now.
Okay, so as we've covered to some degree, transportation, although we listed second because it's something we have somewhat less influence over, it is actually the largest source of emissions. And so it's a pretty important part of our plan. And electrification is going to be the key part. I would say that there's two areas that we've identified where the city in particular can have an impact on the adoption of electric vehicles and use of electric vehicles in town. One is in zoning and other building regulations to improve density, to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and to encourage the installation of vehicle chargers, whether that's installation at multifamily or whether it's installation at commercial places of work or shopping, so that people can charge these vehicles, because that's a barrier that we know exists in addition to cost. And then the dense development is helping to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and also, frankly, just to make it easier to worry less about range on vehicles, to make e-bikes and things like that more attractive as an alternative to gas vehicles.
Denser development also implies more multi-family buildings, which are significantly more efficient thermally.
Co-benefits. And then there's some other recommendations in here about public transport, increasing the availabiliability of bike walk infrastructure. But we know that these are playing a secondary role. Next slide, please. So renewable energy is an interesting one, because strictly in terms of CO2, as we said, we consider the electricity that we're getting from Green Mountain Power today to be essentially carbon free. Nonetheless, because a lot of the transition that we're going to have to undertake in buildings and vehicles to shift them over to electricity means that we're going to have to be consuming a lot more electricity. We want to make sure that that electricity is also coming from renewable sources, and that we're producing as much of it as possible locally, so we reduce the need to build more transmission lines and sort of share in the economic benefits of investing locally in our own projects. So we have some targets here about the amount of renewable energy increase that could come from solar, it could come from wind, it could come from hydro. Realistically, solar is the most abundant resource. It hits the whole town and we get lots of it. And we've done some analysis here on the amount of roof area availability There's other places where solar could go as well that could use some additional analysis. And so the actions largely are around permitting policies and building codes to encourage more buildings to either put solar on immediately or to make it easier to put solar on later if it's not in the budget for the building construction. Next slide. So again, there's not a lot in the plan about the sort of adaptation portion of climate change planning, which is to prepare for warmer weathers and more rainfall, as we discussed earlier. But the natural areas portion does encompass both mitigation, reducing CO2 emissions by absorbing more CO2, by preserving the plants and trees that we have, as well as it provides those adaptation benefits of protecting us against the health dangers from climate change. So we have some mapping here looking at the different parts of town and the different natural resources they have. And so, you know, it does play a role, but we can't plant trees to overwhelm all the need in the other areas, right? We can't get away with burning fossil fuels just by planting trees. So this is a part of the larger goal, and it's about preserving the trees that we have and protecting the ecosystem resources. And there are some recommendations about replacing lawns and incorporating regulations to protect those green spaces.
Trees also can be important in mitigating heat island effects and providing shade and cooling. Vital, I believe, and it's been shown that the temperature difference between a shaded piece of a sidewalk and an unshaded piece of the sidewalk is a huge, like 30 degrees in some cases.
Yeah, question?
Can you clarify what remaining settlement means? I don't understand that term on the map, please.
Yeah.
So the question is to clarify what remaining settlement means on the map. And I apologize, this map is not great. In the next draft, we hope to improve it. It may be hard to pick out South Burlington from that gobbledygook of colors. So settlement remaining, it means the area that is currently developed. This is a map of land cover change over the last few years. The dates escape me right now. So it's basically comparing what the settlement pattern was at the earlier year to the later year and just saying that, you know, that hasn't changed. Okay.
Yeah, Paul. Just one quick note. You noted that this plan doesn't speak too much about adaptation and resilience. There is a parallel project going on across the county and in South Burlington for updating the city's and county's all hazard mitigation plan. And so as that has been taking place in parallel to this, we're a partner with the 18 other towns in Chittenden County, and we've been advocating that the subject of climate change be closely addressed in there from the how do we adapt to what is happening. And so that is happening in parallel to this.
Great, thanks for adding that. Okay, next slide, please. So government operations, if it wasn't clear earlier, the goals and targets and actions are all addressing what we would call a community-wide lens on this action. So not just, though it's the city that's leading this action plan, it is addressing all of the buildings and vehicles in town, not just the ones that the building owns, that the city owns and operates. However, we do specifically call out the actions that the city can take to address its own emissions of the buildings and vehicles that it directly operates. Can you mute, please, if you're not making a comment? Thank you. So we called out, you know, and again, it's a fairly small percent of the city's overall emissions. I think it's less than 2% from some previous estimates we've made. However, it's still important for the city to show leadership, and to, everyone's going to have to address their own operations. So we can see the breakdown here. Some of the large areas have to do with the wastewater treatment plant and public works, which is where there's, a lot of sort of heavy equipment that uses natural gas or transportation fuel. And there are also some buildings that are still heating with gas. So those are going to need to be addressed as well. So there's some policies in here. I'll say that the policies at this level are less about go to that building and fix this piece of it, and more about put systems in place so that we can make strategic investments as the opportunity arises and think holistically about how to continue reducing our emissions over time.
I think the only thing I would add to that is, and it doesn't really show up so much on this chart, at least in the emissions by department, but an aspect of government operations, as you were describing, is also policymaking. And so as we think about where we will spend our capital dollars on projects, some of it will be retrofits to buildings, but or wastewater treatment facilities, and how to do that in an efficient way. Some of it may also be using Penny for PAS money to connect a bike ped, to a missing gap in the bike ped network to support that reduction in vehicle miles traveled. So we have a couple of different roles as government operations, both about our own and the investments that we make.
Yep, good point. So there's a few sectors that when we did our initial inventory analysis showed up as a relatively small portion of the overall emissions. And so not to neglect any pet section for anyone, but we've lumped them together here because they ultimately also have smaller goals. So this is small engines, waste, solid waste, trash recycling, and agriculture food systems. And agriculture food systems, I'll just call out, is not small in Vermont, but it is smaller in South Burlington because we are less well equipped with farms. So there are some recommendations in here regarding trash pickup and small engines, and that, particularly I think for our area means lawnmowers and other yard care equipment. And then again, sort of in terms of the adaptation is increasing access to locally grown food. So, again, this is working with our partners and helping to support policies that make it easier for people to make better choices about their own yards and waste systems.
A side benefit to electrical or battery operated mowers and landscape equipment is that the ones that are in use at the present time, particularly two-stroke engines, are the worst polluters and producers of greenhouse gas emissions relative to their size. I mean, they really are major polluters, and noise as well. But that's a big side benefit to use of electric battery operated machinery.
And I think this is generally one of the benefits we have. As much as I complained earlier about the problem of having waited so long to really start accelerating our progress toward these climate goals, the benefit of having waited is that we have technology solutions that are superior to what they're replacing. The renewable electricity generation that has been used by GMP is cheaper and more reliable than the systems it replaced. Electric vehicles last longer and are more fun to drive and more reliable. They take less maintenance. Heat pumps are, less expensive to operate and provide other comfort benefits. So all of these technologies, it's not about sacrificing, right? The benefit of what we have in front of us isn't that we all have to give up the comforts we have. It's that we have to accelerate the transition to the new technologies that not only have better climate footprints, but they also have a ton of other benefits that make them preferable. Tim?
Comment about the CSWD, I think Sarah Reed shows that approximately 52,000 tons of waste are trucked up to Coventry, the landfill, that should not have had to go because people can't sort properly, both in businesses and in homes. Even though the county has a very high rate of separation, we still sent 52,000 out of 227,000 tons of trash on Coventry. So there's a direct benefit there if people can do a better job in their businesses and their homes and not waste all that diesel to truck all that weight up there. And some of that comes from South Boone.
Yep. And I would say, you know, similar to what Michael was pointing out, that there are other
I
advantages.
couldn't hear what Tim was saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
It sounded pretty
Tim,
good though, but I could only get little snippets of it.
Tim's comment was, what was the number? How many pounds of or tons of? 52,000 tons of waste are getting trucked from South Burlington up to the Coventry landfill. Much of that because there are recyclables or maybe including compostables that haven't been separated from the waste stream. And so we have ways today to reduce the amount of transportation of waste that we're using. So, you know, even though some of these sectors may not contribute a huge amount to the emissions, there are benefits to improving them, right? There's lots of things we could do that would have co-benefits. And so we could figure out ways to, you know, choose better solutions that decrease the carbon footprint, even if it's not the number 1, 2, or 3 thing to do in town. So the fact that things didn't show up here on the top list of high impact actions doesn't mean that we don't think they're a good idea. It just means that though we came up with, I think, more than 100 actions, it's kind of overwhelming to try to communicate that we need to do 100 things at once, right? It just ends up with paralysis. So by prioritizing the top actions, we want that to get most of the attention, but it isn't at all to discourage people from doing any number of other actions that can also reduce the climate footprint, even in small ways. So that's the overview. And I know we got into some discussion as we went along, but this time is now dedicated for questions or feedback. I'll open the floor.
Ethan, there's one thing I would like to repeat, something that I said on Monday, which the IPCC, the UN IPCC report is global in nature. And I think it's quite hard for many people to relate that to what they're experiencing. And I found that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration runs a drought monitoring system in the US. And I picked up the report for June for Vermont. And it was sobering. 95% of Vermont was abnormally dry in June, which meant that crop growth could be stunted, plantings delayed, fire danger elevated, spring fire season starts early, lawns brown, our gardens wilt. Those are a few of the things that are consequences of that. And 36% of Vermont is in moderate drought. I mean, we've been in drought conditions for the last 3 or 4 years, nonstop in the summers. Another interesting point that the fact that they came up with, the 152,311 people in Vermont are affected by drought. That's almost 25% of the entire population of Vermont. And in Chittenden County, Chittenden County had the driest June on record for the last 128 years. So, you know, IPCC report is fine, but it's good to know what's actually happening on the ground right here in Vermont. And I think it's important that we communicate that to South Burlington's residents and citizens. I think it makes everything more understandable and more real. Thanks.
So do you want to hear from the public now, or are you still
Yes,
talking
please.
amongst yourselves? All right.
Yep, no, the floor is open.
Okay, I don't know what other member of the public wants to speak, but I would like to make a few comments. My name is Roseanne Greco. I'm a resident. I haven't read your entire plan yet. I skimmed over, in particular, the parts that I have have done a lot of research on. So I just want to make some general comments. I'm going to type everything up and send it to y'all, but I just want to make a few comments verbally now. So I've been, I think, at all of your meetings. I think I missed one. So I think you're doing fabulous work, and Melanie and Ann as well. So I just had some overall things. I'm going to have some more. One of the things that always sort of irks me is most of us in the United States have a hard time with the Celsius. Plus, it's a smaller number, so it really doesn't have the magnitude. I would really encourage you to use Fahrenheit, because that's what most of us do, and I think it's a bigger number too. So that's just a general thing. I did make the comment earlier about goal setting. You know, if we really have to tell the truth here about what's needed, even though it's overwhelming, because we don't want to fool the public to think that if we just do these little things, we'll be fine. So I think telling the truth based on science is really what is called for in the emergency situation we're in now. I liked the way the slide that you used for equity. I think that really helped a whole lot, especially when you were thinking about things to consider. I think that really, I think it clarified, at least for me, sort of the ambiguous nature of equity. So kudos for that. I really appreciate that. One of the things when we're in an emergency, to encourage action is not going to work. We've been encouraging stuff for decades. We're past the time to encourage. If we have any chance of making it out alive, we have to require it. So I would really urge you to get away from let's encourage or inform to we need to regulate. And the reason we're doing it is because if we don't meet these goals, you know, we're all going to die, because we're all going to die. The one area that I think, and I hope you can bulk up, is the nature-based solutions. I've been doing lots and lots of research on that, and I can send it to you, but I know you've got experts that can find it on your own. And what I have read is that if we stopped extracting fossil fuels tomorrow, no more fossil fuels, and if we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow, if we continue to destroy the natural resources that we have, then we're doomed. We have to do both. It's not just do this and we'll be fine. It's a both and. So I found your section on, I'm going to call it preserving nature, a little weak. You talk a lot about forests. I don't know that South Burlington has any forest by the standards. So if you use the word forest and we don't have any, then there's nothing to do. When in reality, trees are critical, but so is soil. So is dirt. So is grasslands and meadows. To focus only on trees, as magnificent as they are and as essential they are, misses the point that the dirt under our feet can save us if we save it. And that's a transition to food. Our food system is collapsing. Scientists are saying that by the year 2050, the soils that we have right now will not have enough nutrients to provide the food to provide nutrients to the food that we eat. Back in 2013, I believe, we did a study of South Burlington. It was called a Sustainable Agriculture Food Security Study. And the idea behind that was, where in South Burlington do we have arable soil to grow food? So I encourage you to pull that up. Now, a lot of it, unfortunately, has been paved over with houses, but some of it has not. And the soils that we have, that we can grow food here in South Burlington, ought to be preserved, because without food, we're all going to die. And we have, that study at that time said and I know it's changed, but that at that time, with the population in South Burlington, we had enough arable land to feed all of the people in South Burlington. Now, you're not going to be eating bananas or drinking coffee, but there's enough arable land to produce enough nutrients to feed and sustain all of the population of South Burlington. Now, I know we've grown in population and I know we've lost soil, but there's still a lot there. And if we keep destroying it, then we're going to be out of options. So I really encourage you to think about our soils and food and growing food in South Burlington. So I'm going to type this all up and send it to you, but those are the areas where I think you could add more and we could do more. So I'm sure I'm going to have more, but thank you for
Thanks,
listening.
Roseanne. Let me just make one brief comment. I won't try to address all that. I appreciate your feedback, but just to share a little bit of the thinking behind your observation that in some of the actions we use encourage rather than require. And part of that is a reflection on what are the areas that we think the city either currently has the ability to regulate, such as building codes and standards like that, and what are things that we think we really don't and couldn't have the ability to regulate. So for example, electric vehicles, the process of what it would take for the city to require every citizen to buy only electric vehicles, even if we thought that were necessary, is probably outside of the frame of reality, right? We would not get that power granted to us by the state or by the feds. So some places we say encourage because we don't know how much further we can go realistically as a city government. But I definitely appreciate what you're saying, and we are recommending wherever possible to put hard regulations in place and not just to promote people to voluntarily make these choices.
Well, great. And obviously you can't regulate people buying electric vehicles, but you can, and other municipalities have, you can ban gas-powered lawn equipment. You can require that all buildings be use renewable energy sources. You can regulate the preservation of land, that it can't be built on if it's arable soil. All of those things you can do. Other places have done them. Obviously, you can't require individuals to purchase, but you can ban the use of those. As Michael said, gas, powered lawnmowers are horrendously pollutants. In addition to obviously using fossil fuels and stuff, but places have banned them. You can. So just because it's hard and just because you're going to get pushback doesn't mean that's not what we should be striving for, especially when it's been done in other places. So anyway, yeah.
Yep, I think you have a lot of agreement here, Roseanne. Thank you for your support of that, though. Noah, you had made a comment that you'd like to speak.
I'll speak if Noah doesn't.
Okay, I'm going to give Noah just a minute because he put something in the chat. But if not, Ray, we'll call on you and we'll call on Noah next. So, all right, Noah, you're up next after Ray and Ray, go ahead.
My comments are very short. Oh, go ahead, Noah.
No, it's okay. You go, Ray.
All right, my comments are very short. First of all, I support everything that Roseanne just said to you folks. Secondly, I think you guys are doing a great job and keep doing that great job. Two things that I want to add to what you've already done, and maybe it's hidden in the work you've done somewhere and I didn't see it, but the first is an obvious one. The simple idea of creating cooling places for people who cannot find places to cool, like their own home doesn't have air conditioning. They don't have a home. Provide a cooling place where everybody can go who doesn't have access to that cool air for naturally short periods of time. I expect we're going to get heat domes here in Vermont from time to time, just like they have out west and other areas on the globe. There's no reason why Vermont will not be picked to have one of those by nature. So just find a way to put it in there somehow that we should take care of those people when the hot period comes. The other one is this. I live in a homeowner association, and there are two solar rooftop here. One is a very large one and one is a very small one. And the very large one was put in, I don't know how long ago. I've been here 5 years, but the guy had to argue with our homeowner association and finally put it in over their objections. So I think homeowner associations also need to be dealt with. There's a lots of them because there are a lot of housing developments and they have strict rules, and the people who head those organizations, unless they're true believers about climate change, they may continue to lean on the covenants. I think it's possible to do that because the covenants is between the homeowner and the association. It's not between the homeowners and association and the city. So that tells me that the city is able to pass regulations that tells the homeowner associations, you've got to allow people to have solar. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ray. Paul, I think has a response.
Sure. Ray, thanks for bringing those up. I just wanted to note sort of one of the things that doesn't show up unless you start sort of digging into the plan a little bit is that the plan talks about the role of the city in a few different buckets. So one, as a few folks have pointed out tonight, is regulatory authority. One is investment, and one is promotion, which can include, in some areas, advocating to the state legislature. As Ethan said, we're probably not going to influence federal policy that strongly in the next 2-3 years, but we do have the ability potentially to work with our legislators. About 10 years ago, the legislature passed a right to dry law, which prohibited any homeowner association from prohibiting line drawing. That's where that kind of authority could exist here. I don't think, and I'm not an attorney, but I don't think as a Dillinger Rule state, we have the authority to regulate homeowners associations in the way that Ray is speaking to, but a tool in the toolbox is the legislature does have that authority, as they did with the right to dry law. So something to think about as overall, what are the tools in the toolbox?
Thank you, Paul.
I'm under the impression, maybe wrongly, that a homeowners association cannot prevent a homeowner from installing solar panels on that homeowner's roof. It might be the case in a condominium association, but in my case, which is a homeowners association, I believe, despite the bylaws and declarations, I think if you went to the Public Service Commission, they would tell the association you can't stop Michael from putting panels on his roof.
There's some overlapping authority, because I've also heard cities trying to regulate solar, and then the state has its own authority over solar, and so there's multiple different entities trying to enforce that. So it's, I think it's
can I just update my own statement, because Keith Epstein just shared the right to dry law actually includes the same thing that Ray is just speaking about. No deed restrictions, covenants, or similar binding agreements running with the land shall prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting solar collectors, clotheslines, or other energy devices based on renewable resources. So that's already in state law. Great. Thank you, Keith.
So thank you very much. Now I got something to go back with my HOA on. And yeah, the reason I brought this up is that I've already spent $2,500 on legal fees based on two things. One is I got a permit to build something here, and then a new architectural review committee got constituted, and they decided, well, no, we don't want you to do that. That's nonsense. You get a permit and that's the end of that. So I had to spend money on a lawyer for that. And secondly, I said it wasn't exactly a permit, but you could call it a condition of that same permit, that I was going to keep the lawn in front of the new addition as grass. And a year later, the association comes along and threatens me with lawyer's letters that I've got to pave it. So again, I had to go back and deal with my lawyer and pay him some more money to get them to back off. Now they've backed off so far, but the last lawyer statement says it's I need to make a decision whether we should go into mediation or whether I'm going to pave it, so they can prepare their case for the next annual meeting. And I haven't seen the next annual meeting happen yet. But anyhow, that's the kind of stuff I'm dealing with. And this is really excellent to know, because they haven't got a leg to stand on now, and I know that.
And let me just interject quickly. You use the word permit, Ray. I just want to be 100% clear. That is the association. That is not the city. The city has no prohibitions on the
Correct.
things that you're doing. Just to be
Yes,
for everybody
yeah.
out there, that is not a city permit. That is your association. So I just want to be clear on that.
When you need a public display of public disorder in front of your homeowners association, just give me a call.
Acting as a private citizen. Okay, Srini.
Can I just add a point here? The case for dealing with homeowners association or rental owners is much bigger in South Burlington because of the high concentration of condo units and rental homes. And let me just illustrate an example. We had a community event at the Vet Memorial function barbecue last Friday. One of the ladies, very well articulated at this point, who filled out the survey, that she's interested in installing a heat pump. She's interested in, doing weatherization especially. You have to deal with common walls. It's not something you can go and approach on your own. So I think this issue around whether the homeowners association allows solar panel or not, I think the scope is much broader because of the type of housing we have in South Burlington. And I think the city will be best served if we think of a broader approach on how we deal with this type of housing units and tackle the problem over a period of time instead of doing it piecemeal. So thanks.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment, kind of an overriding issue. And this topic in particular has to do with public mindset. And I think we'd all like to hear a lot more comments from the public in terms of the survey about, what people's mindset are who are, sort of not the early adopters, not the ones who have already done a lot of things to their home or have an electric car, but, change is always tough, but, there's certain mindsets that you see, and I see it. Fortunately, I don't live in a condo, but we do have an association where I live. And, even the idea of putting in raised bed gardens for, people who can't get one of the city gardens up at Wheeler Park, because there's a limited number of them, and there are people who just have a certain mindset, and I think it needs to be a broader discussion in the community about, well, what kind of community do we want, and what are some of the restrictions that just our mindsets are placing on what we can do. Another one of those mindset issues that I've been dealing with for basically my whole career as an architect and an efficiency specialist is payback. Well, is this going to pay for itself? Is it going to be a good investment? And I've heard so many people over the years say, well, when is that solar panel on your roof going to, when are those solar panels going to pay for themselves, And I said, well, they've paid for themselves already. I mean, I put them in 15 years ago. It was a good investment. And so I think we need to start talking about these things in terms of investments, not in terms of just in terms of financial terms, but also, I mean, it's an investment in making sure that our planet and our environment and our temperatures and our weather and our rainfall and flooding, lack of, we haven't had terrible flooding for the most part. Just maintaining things the way they are is going to take a huge investment. And I think I'd like to hear from a lot more people about, why they do or don't think that it's worth the money to make those investments.
Thanks. Let's give Noah the floor here.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for taking my comments. I am and have been environmentally active for several years now in the community, and I've been environmentally active for most of my adult life. I don't think let me say it like this. I appreciate the work of the panel, the DRB, all of the communities that we have in South Burlington. Everyone's volunteering. I get it. I mean, I know how much work it takes, and I know how hard it is to juggle that with, children and personal life. And I really want to thank everyone for doing all of the work you're doing. But in the time that I've been environmentally active and trying to affect some type of change to better the world for my children and future generations, I think what's not really being discussed here is that, and it's hard to say because it's embarrassing, and I kind of feel a little, on the spot because I'm the guy that's going to say it. But the world's on fire and the earth is dying. We're talking like in the next 40, 50 years, 60% of all life on earth dead, extinct, all animals, 60%. Those are the real numbers from the UN. In 100 years, South Burlington will have the exact climate of South Carolina, the Palmetto State, palm trees. I'm not saying this. I'm just telling what the scientists say. There will be palm trees on the shores of Lake Champlain. Palm trees, coconuts. For real. It's going to happen. This is not like, I'm not like some exaggerating. This is like, Google it right now in news, sort by one day, and you will see. Spain will have the climate of Marrakesh. London will have the climate of Barcelona, and we're just lucky enough to have the climate of South Carolina. Please, listen to the Climate Action Task Force, please. Maybe we can do a little bit. And as as citizens of a little town in Vermont, we can do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Certainly, those of us who have been volunteering up here share your concerns, and I think part of the challenge that we're looking for help now with is trying to find the best way of communicating that to the rest of the community who isn't already taking time out to come be part of this conversation. And some people may be reached by that stark reality, and other people may be reached through other means. And so that's part of what we're trying to learn right now is how can we best communicate and engage and encourage everyone to do their part and help us get to this very audacious goal. did you have a? Yeah, I think that mic hopefully is on.
Yeah. Oh, Ethan?
Penny, can you, yep, just there's a little button that says push and.
There we go. Okay. So I guess I don't come to many of these meetings. My husband is Michael Mittag, and so he's the one who's doing all that volunteering with your groups. And when I listen to what's going on, I'm in favor of the things that the Climate Action Task Force is doing, but I can count, and there may be 15 people here today and involved in this conversation. And we have 14,000 residents in South Burlington. So I guess my concern, and I have, some of my work is involved with communications. Right now, we're the ones who already support this. And I think it is a huge, the plan is great, but I think it's the buy-in from enough citizens and the spreading of the word and somehow getting that investment in people power of the citizens of South Burlington is what you truly need. The volunteers, you guys are doing the work to tell us how to get there and to present the challenges of what this is and what we need to do. And that's really important. But if there's only 25 people or 50 people, or even just 100 people who are listening to you or taking it to heart, it won't be enough. So sorry, don't mean to be negative, but I can't help but notice that in coming here today, and I'm happy to be here and learn more. But I have a vested interest because I have a person who's a volunteer that I know how hard he works on this, and I want to support what actions you guys are working on. But that's not enough. So I guess that's my comment. Oh, and quick question. There's a survey mentioned in this little pamphlet. I assume it's open now, but how long is it open for?
So I'll answer that question,
Yeah,
Penny.
that's
So
fine. Thank
there is a survey in there. The feedback on this draft of the climate action plan runs through a week from today. The feedback on what do people see as their priorities, which is sort of a more broad question in the survey, I think we're going to keep that open for a while, because as you were just indicating, a big part of this is about bringing the community into it, and there will never be an end date of the climate action plan. So I expect that we'll probably keep that open at least through September while we're building ideas and energy around this. Even if it doesn't wind up informing the plan itself, it will inform how we implement, what the next steps are, et cetera. So those were my thoughts on it.
And Paul put that survey out on Front Porch Forum, so it's available. I saw it today or yesterday, and I guess, Paul, you'll keep track of how many respondents, but I have to.
Yes, and I will also specifically thank Keith Epstein and Ethan Goldman, who are the back of the house part of that, who've been doing all that technical work on it.
But I'm also very disappointed in the turnout. I personally and a friend of mine sent messages, a request that people come to this meeting to at least 100 people. And as Penny has said, here we have 15 or whatever. So we're not reaching the audience yet.
Can I say something real quick? I just sent 50 text messages and emails, maybe 50 texts, 100 emails. I'm shocked by the lack of turnout. There was more turnout on Monday. I'm a little dismayed, and I don't think that this turnout is the measure by which the public's energy should be measured. This is an outlier. It is summer, August 3rd. People are visiting, people are on vacation. My kids are at camp. And I hope that this is not the yardstick. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on that if it's okay.
Wait, can you sort of say who's speaking?
Yeah, so
Let me just make that point against the people that hear me, is that there aren't 100 people here protesting, who disagree with what's being said here vehemently, right? And that's a kind of a good sign, right? So there aren't a lot of public here, but I think that as these policies begin to see implementation and people start to see the effects of what is changing in terms of regulation and policy, and they come up against it when they can't buy a gasoline lawnmower at Lowe's, let's say, or, there's only, electric lawnmowers, or they want to build a new house and they go, I'm sorry, you're only going to have GMP. You can't have V gas anymore. They're going to, but they'll been reading those headlines in the other paper along the way. So I take it as a good sign that there's nobody here protesting violently, right? But this is just the beginning of a wave that will occur slowly as we start to implement these things that you recommend. So thanks.
Yeah, and I think that Tim's point is you'll see it resonate throughout the plan, right? We do identify places where the city can try to encourage folks to take individual action. But the reality is, for decades, we've been trying to convince each individual citizen to go out and do their own research, do their own analysis, invest their own capital, and try to solve a global problem on their own. And while theoretically, it's possible that if we'd all decided to change our priorities in our life, we could have solved the problem this way. Practically speaking, it hasn't been successful. And I don't know if enough of us can yell loudly enough to change that. And so the thrust of the Climate Action Plan is about policies and investment and structural changes. The way that this will most easily be solved is, just like Tim says, if there aren't other choices and we all invest in the things that just work, and we don't have to all think about it every day. It's not actually an ideal solution, even for those of us who care about this stuff, to imagine that you have to spend hours out of every day trying to calculate whether this paperclip was produced sustainably, right? It's just too much burden on all of us. So hopefully we're putting some systemic changes in motion here that will make it easier for us to reach the actual goals we need to get to. So yeah, this is a hard problem.
I think also
I
just
think what
changing
this-
the convert. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think what you're missing here is an attention step. I saw this. I knew this was coming up. I follow it, and people that are attending are the usual suspects, right? But it was billed, and this is no negative on y'all, all right? But it was billed as another meeting. It was, buried in the Front Porch Forum post. I took the survey, but the survey was in the post. You had to open the link, and then the survey was in there. Donna was talking about how do we get, how do you get feedback from people? Penny was talking about the same thing. By the way, there's 21,000 people, Penny, not 14,000 in South Burlington. But if you project it as another business as usual thing, and I hate to tell you, that's sort of what this is. It's another plan the city put forward, and they want comments on it. It's not, as somebody said here, our house is on fire. It is just another meeting. Now, it could be good that there's not here protesters, but you haven't said anything yet. I mean, you haven't said we're going to enact a regulation of no new houses, can have fossil fuel, or we are banning the use of gas-powered lawnmowers effective January 1st, or something like that. You're going to get people's attention then. But right now, you're just talking about a plan to do something. And please, I'm not minimizing your work in the least, but it's just another plan. When you are suggesting dramatic actions that are going to affect people, you're going to get people's attention. So that's what we call in the military the attention step. You do something and everybody is turning around and now they're listening, but it's something dramatic. So I think what Penny was saying as a marketer, maybe you ought to hire a marketer,
Roseanne,
word out. Yeah.
if I can just interject real quick. The election is less than 1 week away. And so a lot of the people who are very active politically are hyper focused on Becca's campaign, or Keith's campaign, or Chittenden campaign, or Mudge, and so I mean that's a big part of it. I've been to 2 or 3 events in the last 24 hours, so I get it, but it is disappointing, and I almost wish that that we could just, can we put this off like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, so we can have a real meeting about this where people can focus, because it is, well, for me, it's like, it's primary. It's like, it's my deepest belief that what's happening to the world. Like, I wasn't speaking in hyperbole. This is what's happening to the earth. And the fact that there's 9 people at this meeting, when for some meetings in the winter we can get 200 people about pine trees on Spear Street. I hope we can maybe think about that.
Yeah, that's fair. No, and this isn't the last chance for people to continue to have involvement. Paul, you had a.
Yeah, I thought this might be a good opportunity to just give a quick overview of sort of the short-term outreach plan and long-term outreach plan. So as was sort of mentioned tonight, this is a piece of the puzzle. The task force felt that having a formal meeting, even though it's a meeting, was an important step to give people sort of a point of please provide comments, things like that. It's not the only form of outreach. There's the survey, there's the posting on Front Porch Forum, there's volunteers from the Energy Committee and the Climate Action Plan that have a whole series of events for every night that is not thunderstorms. If anybody could stop the thunderstorms from happening on every Thursday night, that would be really helpful. And I think most importantly, the task force has talked about how the plan, when it's complete, is the beginning of the outreach, not the end of the outreach. And so the task force members have been talking about using a presentation similar to the one that's here tonight. And then how does that get presented to tens of, and then dozens of, and then beyond that, small groups all around the city, whether it's the Rotary Club or it's a garden club or it's whomever, and continue the conversation and have something to talk about with. And then last thing I'll say is to your question, Noah, about sort of putting things off a month, one of the things that the task force has been working really hard to hit a deadline on is to have their final report to present to council in September this year. To have the final report in September this year, so that the council can be considering that plan in their budget work for fiscal year 24. The budget starts in October for the council. So that timeline is a really critical one. Otherwise, it's an entire year of a future budget that the council hasn't had the chance to think about this. So when we talk about sort of timelines and urgency, that's a really critical one for the council to consider. Great.
I have a question about budgets. I've had to do a few in my life, and I've had to have contingencies because technology might go out of, be not required, and my business will die. Is it possible for the city to change a budget, let's say the fiscal 23 budget, which has already been approved? Would they have to go back to the voters to get it changed? Can they reallocate without going back to the voters?
So the council can reallocate within the budget. And there are some emergency funds in the event of an international pandemic, et cetera, that municipalities keep on the books. Anything that would increase the amount of money being collected from the taxpayers would need to go to the voters.
So it can be moved around, or the emphasis can be shifted from.
The council does have authority. I mean, it's not a blanket authority. There are certain areas, if something is a dedicated fund to a certain thing, like the penny for paths, the council can't override the voters on that. There is some ability to, for the council to
Okay,
reallocate,
I-
but
I'll
I'm
leave it
not
at
our
that.
budget expert, so I'm gonna leave it at that and not answer any more
I think you've
specifics.
answered my question. And just to finish my own thoughts, perhaps some what I could call agent provocateur marketing is required. We'd get a lot of people if we held public workshops with free pizza and free beer. And that's not in the budget. That's why I think it needs reallocation.
Good out of the box thinking, Michael. Thank you. So one quick data point, since there was some question about the survey, I checked, there are currently 92 responses to the survey. The one quantitative piece I can quickly pull up is that there are 14% of people who rated how concerned are you about climate change as a 1, where 61% rated it a 10. Does anyone else from the public want to speak tonight? I know we're running out of time here, and there's a few people who haven't spoken yet. Keith, I saw your hand go up, and then.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. One is to say I am so excited to see the progress. I've been on the Energy Committee since it started in 2008, and a lot of the things that we were discussing then are on your list, which shows really how ineffective we have been, unfortunately. But when the council passed the resolution saying that the cities should create a climate action plan, the council actually asked the Energy Committee, "Can you put it together?" And our response was no. Well, we can, but that's not the way we want to do it. We wanted to have a much broader cross-section of the community, volunteers from a lot of different committees. And so it's so exciting to see Economic Development Committee and Planning Commission and Bike and Ped, and I'm sorry, I'm not getting everybody, affordable housing, all coming together to create this plan. So that's super exciting. Really happy to see at least one city councilor at this meeting. Thank you, Tim, for coming.
We have 2, in fact, Keith.
Oh, 2.
Councillor Reilly is also here.
Oh, excellent. Very glad, very glad to hear that. Thank you, Helen. And then a couple things that have been going through my mind as I've been listening. One is I've been comparing in my mind how this plan dovetails with the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan starts with goals, very high level, and then gets down to objectives, and then gets down to the very specific strategies. And I think there may be some opportunity to do some of that here, where kind of tighten up some of the suggestions and turn them into specific strategies, specific actions that we can identify who is actually responsible for implementing these things. And that may help get some of the work done that we want to see get done. Because like, as Paul said, this is just the beginning, I'm hoping anyway, the next step after the plan is done is, well, let's create a task force for implementation. And that's got to get its fingers into all the different volunteer committees and a lot more public outreach and figure out how we get these things done. So I think being more specific. Also, several of the actions related to other communities. So I think regional collaboration is really important. For example, joining a 2030 district. Well, Burlington has a 2030 district. If we want to do one, should we do one on our own, or should we join with Burlington's and create a greater Burlington 2030 district? Looking at energy codes, and if we go beyond the stretch energy code, doing something like Burlington has done with not allowing fossil fuel connections except for in certain circumstances. The more we can do that align with what other communities are doing, either exactly the same rules or form some regional collaborative, I think the bigger impact we can have, because there won't be so much confusion as you go from one community to the other, and also we can bring in a larger population of people. And then the final thought is related to a map that I'm pretty sure that many of you have seen. It's from On the Map by the U.S. Census Bureau that shows how many people come into South Burlington to work, how many people who live in South Burlington leave every day to go to work, and how many live and work in South Burlington. And it's around 16,000 people come into South Burlington to work, about 7,500 leave, and only about 2,500 stay here. And I'm wondering, what can we do to increase the number of the circle, the people who both live and work here, and decrease the number of people who leave and the number of people who come in, because that can have a big impact on vehicle miles traveled.
Thanks, Keith.
Two quick points.
Can you jump up to the mic, please, so that folks at home can hear you?
Two quick points. One regarding the marketing turnout. One of the speakers who called in, good point. This is middle of summer here. Everybody's busy. That's an excuse. So at the local level here, what you're doing, very much applauded, and it's exciting. It's encouraging, and it is the future. This is where it's going. Discouraging when I read China's building 1,500 new coal plants in the next 15 years. They just did a contract with Russia to buy 100 million tons of dirty coal. So on the grand scale, you hear that, it's discouraging. And it's huge. The scale of this is extremely large. So I find it encouraging, enthusiastic, great energy in the room here, and applaud to everybody here involved doing this. Thank you very much. When I see the larger scale, some of the things going on in the world, very discouraging. And I wonder if that translates to people being a little bit apathetic about, even at the local level, getting involved or paying attention to what's going on. Last point quickly, just the power tools were brought up. 2 days ago, I'm over at Home Depot. I got my Ryobi 40-volt weed whacker, which goes with, my 40-volt blower, which, by the way, in the past, I've had it for 2-3 years. The best purchase I think I've made was that blower. Absolutely fantastic. And I've got a 14-inch chainsaw, again, a 40 volt. Okay, so I highly endorse these products. Okay, they're fantastic. And I know I've talked to commercial landscapers, and Burlington's got they're right in the middle now with the noise pollution. They can't use them, but it doesn't seem as if the technology's there yet for commercial use in terms of cost. But again, I would encourage everybody listening, go get your cordless power stuff. They work fantastic. And thank you for your time and effort, everybody here.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely understand that it's discouraging that we don't have the whole planet moving in the same direction, although in a lot of ways, China is making progress, even though they're building coal at the same time. They're also putting in more solar plants than anyone else. And I guess what I would say, because I think we often get this question, and I offer this just because I hope that all of you who have taken the time to join us here will also help us by going and talking to your neighbors and making sure that folks know that this is happening, and ask them to go fill out the survey and give us feedback, and just to spread awareness about this plan, because it's true, right? No matter what South Burlington does, if we exceed our goals, we will not single-handedly solve climate change for the whole planet. But on the other hand, we can't very well ask that the climate stay livable for humans when everyone else does it first, right? This is what leadership is all about, is being willing to take the first step, even if you know that it's going to take everyone coming along to get there. Vermont has been a leader in this space for decades. Efficiency Vermont, much as I think we take it for granted sometimes when we live here, has been a national and international leader. And so there's lots of ways that Vermont has already been leading in this way. And I hope we continue to lead, and we keep looking for the next frontier of where to keep pushing toward these very ambitious goals. So thank you all for your time in coming here. And please join us in helping to make this a reality. There's a lot of work to go. Just stick with us for the next 30 years, and I'm sure we'll get there. Any other final comments from anyone?
Yeah, I just wanted to, since we have two city councilors here, just put in a plug. ARPA money. I can't imagine any better way to spend ARPA money than the planning and the beginnings of some of these proposals that we've laid out in the climate action plan. I'm sure there's a lot of demands on that money, but if you want to get people's attention, dedicate the majority of that money to climate action plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we should try not to be discouraged by what other people around the world are not doing. We should focus on the good stuff that's happening here and anywhere else. Just focus on the areas of the countries, the regions that are doing the right thing. There's a lot wrong with some parts of the world, but we're moving in the right direction. And I think Donna is right about ARPA money. It was a little, I was a little taken aback that there was nothing in the ARPA money survey about climate change. So, but I put something in a text box. Yeah. Adjourn.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned for tonight.
Thanks, Ethan.